our results, followed by the results particularly for St. Lucia. I must first give some context to 2022. In 2022, we again saw a reduction in the requirements for the school-based assessment by as much as 50%. We also, as I mentioned previously, delayed the examinations by 3 weeks. Subsequently, previously we would have given a 6 weeks delay or extension, you may say, for the submission of the SBAs. We agreed for the release of topics for paper 2. We also again had the deferral of candidates, but this time around, candidates could defer up to the day before the examinations. So the context of 2022 examinations is as described. So for the administration, firstly, I will go through the CAPE and Ccslc, that's the Caribbean Advanced Proficiency Examination, as well as the Caribbean Secondary Examination Certificate. So for registration this year, we saw a decline in relation to the candidates' registration, and the candidate registration, particularly for CAPE, in relation to the subject entries, where we also saw a decline. I must say that heartening for us, and I'm sure for the centers and the ministries of education, is that where we saw an increase in terms of the number of candidates presenting themselves for examinations, which means that we saw a reduction in absenteeism. And that is a very good signal for us, because it tells us that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and some level of returning to normalcy. For Ccsc, we also saw a reduction for the candidate entries, but we saw an increase for the subject entries. And this is telling us, as I said before, that more candidates may be applying to registering, I should say, to do more of our examinations, which is also good in terms of their preparation for higher education, as well as for the world of work. I must say also that while we would have had that reduction in terms of the absenteeism, well, not while, we would have had the reduction for the absenteeism for Ccsc, we also saw an increase, for Ccsc. Unfortunate for that. Now for the administration, yes, we had the 3-week delay, which of course we saw varied responses from, and I would say specifically our candidates and our parents, because this is where the core of it really is, in the homes. And we saw where some candidates would have been very happy because they would have gotten increased time to prepare for examinations, while others would have been concerned about the delayed results for matriculation in higher education institutions. But of course, the Caribbean Examinations Council would have put systems in place to facilitate those candidates, and so they were able to apply and request for their results to be sent to universities, requiring same a bit earlier. So those candidates would have requested for their transcripts to be sent to universities, especially those in the UK and the US, which starts a little bit earlier than us, pretty much in August. But those results would have been sent to those universities for which they applied in last week. That would be the 1st of September. So their preliminary results would have been sent to the universities, not to the candidates. I must say that this is good because this is where we are talking about collaboration. CXC also went as far as to write to all of the universities, whether or not candidates would have asked, just to remind them that we would have delayed examinations by 3 weeks, and we were asking them to take into consideration this matter and to really facilitate our candidates who would be receiving results a bit later. which would be the last week in August, we promised, to the first week in September. I must say that of concern to the Caribbean Examinations Council at the time would have been the risk of paper security, because we would have already released the papers to our local registrars. But I must say a special thanks to our local registrars who had that responsibility. And even though we would have had some of the subjects that would have commenced, they managed it very well. So a big thank you to our local registrars who they have to do that work within the various territories. Go ahead and give them a round of applause. So we would have had some subjects that would have started, for example, the modern languages, we would have had orals commencing, visual arts and art and design, the physical education and sport, and music. There's nothing we could have done about this, but as I said before, well handled. The Caribbean Examinations Council we saw where even though we would have given the extended deadline in relation to the submission of SBAs, in some cases, we still had non-submission of SBAs. We are not happy about this. I'll speak a little bit more about this in a little while, but it's something that we are encouraging our territories to give a deeper look into so that we can see that kind of improvement. However, overall, we must say that the various issues would have been resolved to facilitate a general smooth running of examinations and to the mitigation against candidates being disadvantaged generally. Electronic testing. Of course, as we move into this direction and in preparation for what we would want to see in January 2023, all candidates doing at least the first component, the paper 1, electronically. We did have ongoing training for ministry officials and chief invigilators in 2022. Yes, we did see challenges experienced with internet access, power outages, incorrect version of the secure browser being downloaded, but none affecting candidates negatively. The good thing is that we saw an increase in the utilization by territories, and I'd like to share a bit of statistics with you. So for Cape, we saw a 76% increase over 2021, a 24% increase for Csec, and a 22% for the Ccslc. Now this is very good. In particular, we had 2 territories where we saw an increase moving from about little over 100 to over 1,400 candidates sitting, utilizing the electronic testing. Likewise, another 100 to over 400. So it tells us that together we are moving in this direction. Now, for the school-based assessment, I would like to share a bit more. Yes, we would have continued our SBA sessions with our teachers, and we will continue this. This is something of interest to the Caribbean Examinations Council as we work together with our teachers and centers and territories. We must say, even with the extensions, that we would have gone even past the time. So we would have publicized an extension for July. I must say to St. Lucia and the rest of the region that we accepted school-based assessments even much later as we worked with the local registrars, in the sense that where there were problems with the centers uploading, we tried our very best to ensure that we addressed that. So, of course, interventions to continue in 2022-2023 as we work with the educational system to improve in this particular area. While you're looking on screen, you'll see a comparison for the SBA records across the 2018-2022 period. And this year, we had a 94.45% submission of SBA records. Now, that has a twofold component. you have to submit the SBAs as well as the scores have to be included. So submission of your SBAs without scores, of course, that equals to a delay. But not only that, it also equals to the possibility of a candidate being ungraded. So that's where the additional work comes in. We saw where 4,838 candidates did not submit the SBA to the teachers at all. So that means it did not reach the CXC any at all. And that represents a 5.02%. While a reduction over 2021, it still is a cause for concern because it's far more than what we would have seen in the previous years, 2018, 19, and 20. For Csec, likewise, we saw a reduction in terms of the records not submitted to the teachers, but a whopping 25,967, I would say, is still something as an educational system across the region we do not want to see. One student left behind is one too many. The 93.23% that's recorded in terms of the SBA submission, while over the previous period is still less than previous years. So we'd like to encourage our teachers and candidates, students, parents across the region as we look forward to a new academic year, which in my understanding starts today in St. Lucia and various times across the region. Let us work together. And of course, it is the Caribbean Examinations Council's intention to be meeting with various stakeholder groups, especially between over the September, October to November period, to ensure that preparation for 2023. I must say that 2022 examinations, we did see a few irregularities and what we call hardships. Now, the irregularities are where we see the issues of cheating, collusion, cell phone usage. It is something that, as you notice, my face would have changed because this is not something you want to happen. But it happens, and it's the only thing we can do at this point is to encourage our candidates to take note of what is not to be done. But we will see. It's an opportunity for the 2023 group to take note of it and to improve. So we do know that this is going to happen. I must say, however, that the cell phone usage was probably, I would say, of this 37 total, maybe 90 or 80% of what would have happened. It means that students, what I'm speaking about is possession on person, yeah? So that is very important to note. And please, as a practice, even in your assessments, have the students practice to sit the exams without those cell phones. So we did see a reduction for CAPE, a very minus 80%, which is very, very good. Unfortunately for Csec, we are seeing a 75% increase, bringing us to an overall 23% increase for irregularities. Hardships. Hardships is where you may have situations of death in a child's family, the death sometimes of a parent. Candidates may have contracted COVID or any other illness. We do take this into consideration. And the candidates are not disadvantaged in any way. We offer what is called an assessed grade, and the candidates are graded. For CAPE, we saw an increase of 25%, and for Csec, a reduction of 57%, overall reduction of 48%. Another signal of returning to some level of normalcy. This is good for the region, as I'm sure, Minister, that we are having more candidates going back to face-to-face for this academic year. So for the results for 2022, as you would have known in previous years, I'm not sure if I need to go through this, but it is our varied examinations which I'll share with you. And the grades, module grades for CAPE, profile grades for CSEC, mastery competent for Ccslc, CVQ competent, not yet competent, and the CPA, which of course for the first time St. Lucia would have been involved in for the CPA. So for CAPE, our grading system, of course, from grade 1 to 6, we have the Caribbean, right, sorry about that. So Caribbean Studies, I will start with the Caribbean Studies where we would have seen a reduction in 2022 in the performance regarding grades 1, overall constant, and we would have seen a reduction also in grades 2, but stable for 3 and increase in 4 and 5. Remembering that grades 1 to 5 are acceptable grades for CAPE. For communication studies, the overall performance for communication studies is 94%, a reduction over, 92%, a reduction over the previous year. We saw a reduction for CAPE 1 for grades 1 and 2, but stable for grades 3 and an increase for 4 and 5. I must pause briefly to make mention of just one point for the communication studies. Just an encouragement for greater focus for the 2023 group as we look at what happens in relation to the candidates in terms of the message creation. So I just want to give you a little pop on that. I will, and we will, Caribbean Examinations Council, we are looking at having a bigger forum where we will share the depth of what we would have seen in some of these areas. But we want to encourage the candidates to use the subject reports, exemplars in particular, because it's everything pulled together, where you can see examples of good responses from candidates. And that is placed on our Learning Hub. And I must say, if you visit the Learning Hub, you'll see all of those details. So this is very important, and I really want to make sure that I put that plug there. Information Technology, Unit 1, we saw a reduction for both grades 1 and 2, an increase for 3 onwards to 5, and an overall reduction for Unit 1. However, for Unit 2, we saw an overall increase to 96%, and also for the grades 1 through to grades 2, and a reduction from 3 to 5. Additionally, for Food and Nutrition, Unit 1, we would have seen no grade 1s for Food and Nutrition Unit 1, an overall reduction, but for Unit 2, we would have seen an increase to 4% of grades 1 and an overall increase of 97%. So grades 1 and 2 would have, consistent with Information Technology Unit 2. For Law, we saw a stability there for the grades 1, an increase for Unit 2 and Unit 3, stability at 4, and a reduction at 5. So we are seeing an overall all-time high for Law Unit 1 at 93%. For Unit 2, likewise stable, similar to 2021, a reduction for Unit 1, for grades 1, but an increase for grades 2 and a reduction for grade 3. For Physics Unit 1, while we saw an increase, I should say, over 2021, it was a reduction over previous years, but I must say for grades 2 and, of course, our overall performance, we would have seen an increase for Physics Unit 1. Likewise, for Physics Unit 2, we would have seen an increase for the grades 1 to 32% and an overall increase of 98% for the performance in physics. So that gives you a taste of what we saw in CAPE. Of course, there are many subjects here, so I would not go through all of them. And likewise, I will do a sampling of the Csec results. So kudos to the CAPE candidates and good job as you went through. For Csec, of course, acceptable grades 1 to 3. I will start with English A. English A, where we saw stability at grades 1 at 19%, and a reduction for grades 2 and 3 and overall performance. For English B, we saw an increase for grades 1 also and grades 2, and a reduction for grade 3, but an overall increase from 63% last year to 72%. For biology, we saw a 26% increase in grades 1 and 2, a 26% performance for grades 1 and 2, and an overall performance to 78% for our candidates across the region. Chemistry, we saw an overall reduction to 59%. And while, of course, we saw an increase at grades 3, we saw a reduction at grades 1 and 2. Now, chemistry, of course, like biology, but more so, a very practical and hands-on subject. So we are looking, as we go back to face-to-face, some improvements in this area, because those components where we saw the reduction, I believe, would have been a major alignment with the fact that candidates would have been out. But of course, that's a longitudinal study, not for me at this moment. For physics, we saw a 23% stability there for 2021, a reduction from 67 to 64%. For integrated science, stability there, at overall performance of 67%, as well as stability at grade 1. We saw a reduction at grade 3, but of course an improvement at grade 2. That's integrated science. For mathematics, we saw a reduction for the grades 1 and 2, but for stability at grade 3. Overall, we saw a reduction for the performance to 37%. Principle of accounts, we saw an increase, 69%, not only overall, but for grades 1 and 2, and stability at grade 3. Principle of business, likewise, we saw an overall performance increase to 80%, and we saw an increase at both grades 2 and 3, and a slight reduction at grade 1. Geography, we saw a reduction at grade 1, but of course, and synonymously, grades 2, 3, and overall performance. Social studies, an overall reduction from grades 1 through to 3, as well as the overall performance. French, we saw a similar performance, and I must say for human and social biology, because it is our first year for the school-based assessment, we would have seen, yes, slight reduction in the overall performance, but an increase at grades 2 and 3, right? So we did see where we saw some impact there from the SBAs. For St. Lucia, Ccslc, for the sciences, we saw an overall improvement for biology for St. Lucia from 80% to 82%, while we saw a reduction in chemistry in line with the region. We saw an increase for human and social biology and integrated science, 91% and 79% for the performance, so that's very good, and a 61% reduction for physics. For mathematics and information technology, while we saw a reduction for math as well as information technology, we saw an increase for additional mathematics. For the humanities, we saw a reduction for social studies, geography, and English English B as well as English A. For technical and vocational subjects, such as the industrial, tech, building, and so on, while we saw a reduction for the technical drawing, we saw an increase for the industrial technology, electrical, and a reduction for building. Home economics. For family and resource management, we saw 100% per overall acceptable grades for family resource, 90% for food, nutrition, and health, as well as 65% for textile, clothing, and fashion. For business, we saw an increase in the principle of business performance, as well as office administration and economics topping at 90%, over 84% for last year. Cape 1. We will say we saw a 100% acceptable grades for physics, also 95% performance stable with over the previous 2021, and of course keeping it high from 2019-2020, and a 90%, while a reduction for chemistry over 2021, far more than 2019 and 2020. So that's very good still. For mathematics and information technology, while we saw a reduction in applied math, we saw a stable 100% acceptable grades for information technology, a reduction for pure math, but an increase of 55% for integrated mathematics. For the humanities, while we saw a reduction for communication studies and Caribbean studies in line with the region, history, law, we saw a 100% performance overall grade of 1 to 5 for both history and law. Very good. Sociology also, we saw 96%. Thank you. Business, this is where you had a 100% performance for all your business subjects right across, yes. Well done. Accounting, economics, entrepreneurship, management of business. For Cape 2, I will say this was also very good for the sciences, all three, biology, chemistry, and physics. You had a 100% performance for biology and physics, and for chemistry, more than last year. In fact, the most over the last 4 years at 94%. For mathematics and information technology, 89% for applied math, consistent 100%, similar to over the last 4 years for information technology, and 85%, 1% more than last year. For the humanities, for Cape 2, 100% acceptable grades for history and sociology, and in line with the region, 95%, and I would indeed say that looks like 11% more than last year. For business, again, Cape 2 did just as well as the Cape 1 candidates, where you saw 100% acceptable grades across all 4 subjects. Very good for Cape 2. I think you need to clap St. Lucia. In Jamaica, we had just a little pause here. We had Miss Lou, and she would say, clap yourself. Yeah? So it means you, of course, you have to say, you have to look at what you have done and say, well done to the candidates. They worked hard. For Ccslc, that is our Caribbean Certificate of Secondary Level Competence, we saw a reduction in candidate and subject entries. We also, however, saw in line with Csec a reduction in the absentees. For the comparative candidate entries across the board, we saw an increase for the most part, except for sociology and mathematics and English. I must say, for the performance, we did see quite a bit of increase in that orange line, which shows mastery, and more so in the middle section that is reflective of the candidates in terms of their competence. For CPA, it is the first time that the Ministry of Education would have engaged in the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment that CXE offers. So you have joined the many other countries, as you are seeing on screen, territories that offer the CPA. And the CPA, of course, has a 6-component school-based and 4 external examination components. The candidate entry, as you are seeing on screen, of course, for St. Lucia being the first time, you have a whopping little bit over 2,000, greatest across the region, actually. For the external assessment performance, while we saw a slight reduction for language, we saw an increase in mathematics. We saw likewise for study, I would say for social studies, but a little reduction in the scientific component. So it's new for St. Lucia, and I must say that this is an area that we would have provided further details for the ministry, especially in these 4 components. Item analysis, we give you individual performance by literacy, the distribution for the external components, as well as the frequency distribution for the composites. Let me quickly move to the final area, the Caribbean Vocational Qualifications for this session. In 2022, we would have had 2,257 candidates registered across 56 occupational areas. That was a slight reduction over 2021. Now, you must remember that the Caribbean Vocational Qualification is a very practical subject, qualification, and so it requires a lot of involvement of the candidates. So we do expect to see an increase as we go back face to face. So yes, that is representative of what we would have seen across the region. Entries by territories are shown on screen, and we must say congratulations to Guyana, where they are now doing the Caribbean Vocational Qualifications for the first time, and of course we do encourage St. Lucia to join. The territories by gender are represented there, and you must note that the most popular occupational areas remain with food prep being among them, data operations, of course, electrical installation, general cosmetology, and of course, metalwork engineering. We must say for this year, so far, because the assessment is done throughout the year, and given COVID, we had some flexibility where the region was concerned, so we work with the ministries and we facilitate the audits at different times. So these are all preliminary results, but a little bit more preliminary than the Csec and Ccslc and CPA, because audits still continue. They have not been finished. So right now we would be at 77 of the candidates receiving their transcripts and 24 full CVQ. But not to worry, we do expect the numbers to go up. So let me say thank you again to the staff, the local registrars, the candidates' parents, teachers, our chief examiners, I should say assistant chief examiners who make up our examining committees, universities, colleges, and everyone who would have put everything into this to make sure that we were able to deliver on all of our products. Again, thank you very much.
I'd like to express sincere apologies, Dr. Manning, for your incident. But I guess all will agree how fluid and how confident you are with the body of knowledge.